So basically what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be breathing new life into Will's 200SX back here. Under the hood, it's going to be an SCR now. You're going to need a few things to pull this off. You're going to need an engine, of course. You're going to need a transmission, clutch, flywheel, motor mounts, brackets, harness, ECU, axles, radiator. Typical stuff that you would need for an engine swap in any car, really. You're going to need exhaust system, a header or whatever exhaust manifold you plan on running, and sensors, you name it. It's a gang of stuff. Let's get into it. We're going to go over everything that you need in order to pull this off in your B14.
I'm riding in my B13, it's some shit you never seen. Run up if you want, I'll blast you with a triple beam. Sipping on the lean when I roll up on the scene. Yeah, I'm riding clean, riding in my B13. I'm riding in my B13, it's some shit you never seen. Run up if you want, I'll blast you with the triple beam. Nigga, fuck your scat pack, fuck your Hellcat, fuck your 335. Yeah, you riding clean, but I'd rather be riding in my B13.
Depending on which engine that you choose, you may have to mix and match parts around in order to make this thing work. So that's what we had to do here. We're dealing with an Infinity G20 long block out of a P11. This is considered a roller rocker, so it's a little bit different sensor wise. So a few things had to change in order to make this compatible with the car that we're going to be working on. So we're going to go over everything that is needed to change on the engine, on this specific engine, in order to make it compatible with the 95 car that we're putting it in. All right? What we're dealing with here is a roller rocker SR20, which came out of a 2002 Infinity G20. Now, being that we're going to be putting this engine into a 200SX, I went ahead and changed the valve cover to a B14 2.0 SE valve cover, because we don't put Infinity parts in Nissans. You know what I'm saying? We put Nissan parts in Infinities. That only goes one way. So had to change the valve cover so that it will match the car that it's going into. You know what I'm saying? Now, in order to make this roller rocker engine compatible with a 200SX from 1995, we had to change the intake manifold. Now, you don't necessarily have to swap the intake manifold, but if you choose to keep the stock roller rocker intake manifold on the engine, you're going to run into an issue where you're not going to have any idle control, because that intake manifold has the idle control built into the throttle body, and it uses a 0 to 5 volt reference stepper motor type design, not a solenoid type on and off design like the older style. So being that we're going to be using a B14 ECU in this car, we installed a B14 intake manifold. You get me? Now, whenever you install this intake manifold onto a roller rocker engine, it's been known to add 7 to 15 additional horsepower just based on plenum volume, because this manifold is way bigger than the factory roller rocker SR20 intake manifold. Now, if you're going to be doing this swap into a B14 and you do the intake manifold swap, you're going to need to change the coolant pipes on the rear of the engine. All of these are going to have to change. They're going to have to come from the car that you pull the intake manifold off of, because the roller rocker ones are not compatible with this intake manifold. So if you're going to grab this intake, grab the coolant pipes to go with it. You're going to need to shave the throttle body bolt here because it's very close to the valve cover. I've gone ahead and shaved this one and made sure that it does not touch. The roller rocker SR20 has a PCV valve that goes straight out, and it ends up going straight into the throttle cable bracket, which means you can't use it. So we have this 90-degree one off of a Toyota that we used, and we took a piece of hose and ran it over here so that we could end up at this port. As I mentioned before, we're going to be using a B14 ECU in this car out of a 96 SER, right?
So in order to make this a plug-and-play situation, you're going to need a B14 SER engine harness. Now, this specific harness came off of a 1995 B14 SER, and when you're doing this kind of swap, what you want to do is you kind of want to match the harness to the year of the car, or at least get it close to it. So if you're working on a B14, I believe that 95 and 96 are the same. 97 is a little bit different, and then 98 and 99 are completely different. So based on what year car you're working on, that's going to dictate which harness and ECU you need to grab in order to make this possible. Now, when it comes to engine harnesses, when you're ordering an engine harness or buying an engine harness, make sure you get all of the sections of that harness. For the engine alone, there's 4 different sections. You have a main portion which connects to the ECU and goes inside the car. You have a transmission portion which connects to all the sensors on the trans. You have an alternator portion which, you know, goes on your passenger side fender well, and then you also have the injector portion, which typically on a low port engine will stay with the engine and be tucked up under the intake manifold. Make sure that you get all portions of the harness, because if you don't, man, you're going to be in a world of hurt trying to find the correct harness. These cars are pretty rare now and hard to find. So make sure, if you're buying a harness from somebody, make sure all portions are there. Now, being that we're going to be using a B14 SER engine harness and ECU, we're going to be running a B14 SER distributor so that it matches the harness and ECU. Now, not saying that you couldn't run a roller rocker distributor, it's just configured a little bit differently. On a roller rocker, the distributor has the plugs on the front, but on a low port DE, the plugs are in the back. So you may need to extend the harness or something if you choose to run the factory roller rocker distributor. But, you know, for simplicity's sake, try and get a B14 SER distributor or a G20 P10 94 through 96 distributor. So it'll be plug and play with the harness that you're working with. So of course we're going to need an exhaust manifold for this project, right? Now, the roller rocker SR20, the exhaust manifold that comes factory has a catalytic converter built into it, or pre-cat assembly. But being that we're dealing with an older car here, we're not going to have to run a pre-cat on this engine. We can run a header instead. So what this is just a basic eBay 2.5-inch header. These are relatively inexpensive, 100 to 150 bucks on eBay or Amazon, and they're pretty readily available. This is 10 times better than a stock exhaust manifold or a pre-cat type exhaust manifold. Now, while we're on the topic of the exhaust manifold, you're also going to want to grab an oxygen sensor. Now, this oxygen sensor came from a 1995 200SX SER. These can be purchased on Rock Auto or at your local parts store. They should have these either in stock or be able to get them for you relatively quickly. Oxygen sensor, very important. So hopefully when you got your engine, it came with accessories like AC compressor, alternator, power steering pump. If not, then you're gonna have to source those items. As far as the AC compressor goes, it looks like the 1.6 AC compressor is gonna be able to work with the SR20 engine. The only thing that may pose a problem will be the AC line, but I think they're compatible between 1.6 and 2.0, so we'll have to see. In regards to your power steering pump, you're gonna have to source a power steering line for a B14 SER in order for your power steering to work. The 1.6 line will not work with the power steering. So make sure you grab a B14 SER high pressure power steering line for the power steering pump. Now we're at the back of the engine. This is very important. This is your axle carrier bracket right here. Being that we're going to be using an LSD transmission in this car, we're going to be using an LSD axle carrier bracket from a B14 SER. Now with this specific engine, I've already gone ahead and replaced a bunch of gaskets and did a whole bunch of resealing on this engine so that once it's in Will's car, he's not going to have to worry about any type of maintenance or anything. All he's going to have to do is put gas in this thing and enjoy it. All right, enough engine talk for a little while. You're going to need a transmission for your SR20 engine. The GA16 one will not work. For Will's car, we're going to be using this one. It's pretty rare. It's a 1999 P11 G20 LSD 5-speed. Now, what sets this transmission aside from the rest is, first and foremost, it's hydraulic. And then secondly, it has cooling fins on the front. Now, I have not decided how I'm going to go about this install in Will's car yet, being that this transmission has hydraulic and his car is a cable type. I don't know if I'm going to convert the car to hydraulic or if I'm going to convert the transmission to cable. While we're on the topic of transmissions, you're going to need axles to match the transmission. Now these are B14 SER LSD axles. They can be sourced from 95 to 97 200SX SER. Now if you're working with a non-LSD trans, then you want to get axles from a 98 to 99 B14 SER. In addition to your transmission and axles, you're going to need a clutch and flywheel setup. Now, of course, this is all going to be personal preference. I choose to go with OEM replacement. I found this in the junkyard on a G20, and it looks like somebody had just replaced this on the car, and they did not drive it much thereafter. The fingers have very, very little wear from the throwout bearing, and the clutch disc has plenty of pad life left on it. So this should work out fine for what Will is trying to do with his car. If you're looking to add horsepower, then of course, go with a stage clutch or something. Very important side note, the flywheel that you choose to use, if you're working with an OBD2 car, make sure you get an OBD2 flywheel. If you end up with an OBD1 flywheel, then you're going to have a check engine light for the crank angle sensor. Don't make that mistake. Make sure you get the correct tooth count for OBD2. SER engine mounts or brackets. Once we get everything together with this engine and get the trans all bolted up and everything, it'll be ready to go into the car. Now, in order to make the engine bolt to the car, you're going to need SER engine mounts and brackets, okay? Now, these can be sourced from any SER from 91 to 1999. You're going to need a starter, of course. That's got to be from an SR20 engine. You can choose any starter from 1991 to 2002. Be sure to get the correct mass airflow sensor. You want to match this to the ECU and harness that you're running. Being that we're running a B14 SER engine harness and a B14 SER ECU, it's only right that we run a B14 SER mass airflow sensor. Very important sensor. The car cannot run without this. Now, this isn't necessarily a necessity, but I recommend doing it. Being that you're going to be dealing with a 2.0 engine now, it would only be ideal if you got a 2.0 radiator. So what we have here is a brand new SER radiator for Will's car. We're going to be using a 1.6 fan on the left hand side, and we're going to be using the 2.0 SER fan on the right hand side. And this is just for clearance because the 1.6 fan for the right side, it sticks out. The motor sticks out pretty far, and I don't want it to be, very close to the exhaust. The 2.0 one is more slim-like, so we're going to use a 2.0 right side fan. And this is all going to be plug and play. The main difference that's going to be between a 1.6 and 2.0 radiator is going to be the size of the inlet and outlet ports. 1.6 engine uses smaller radiator hoses, whereas a 2.0 uses bigger. So that everything matches, we're upgrading the radiator to 2.0. Special delivery, y'all. The exhaust system for Wheels 200SX just came in. This is a 2.5-inch catback system from VRS. VRS has been in the game for a very, very long time, and they're very well known amongst the front wheel drive SR20 community. They're one of the only companies that make a bolt-on solution for the exhaust systems for these chassis. So if you ever need an exhaust system for your B13, B14, P10, P11, hit up VRS. They'll get you right.